So Shannon Rants is a licensed professional counselor and received her master's degree from Grace College and Seminary in Indiana. She has a private counseling practice, which can be found at shannonrants.com, that helps adults seeking support in the areas of gender and sexuality. Shannon is also director of Come Arise Ministries that seeks to support and provide Christ-centered educational training about gender and sexuality for individuals, churches, and organizations. She also teaches gender and sexuality at Canby Bible College. While Shannon cares deeply about coming alongside others and serving the body of Christ, there's no greater privilege for her than for her to be a wife and mother of 3 adventurous boys. Together as a family, they enjoy camping, skiing, fishing, and playing lots of games. So we're thrilled to have Shannon here, and I'm just gonna make her host real quick so she can share her screen. And then just a few other things real quick. I am recording this. And it's just going to be shared with those who have all those participants. It's not going to be shared to anybody else. So things will remain confidential here. And I'll send that recording out tonight and tomorrow night's out, probably on Sunday when I get the recording back from Zoom. And also we're going to have just a private Facebook group for all the participants from this weekend. And I'll invite you to join that probably tomorrow or Sunday. That way it can be a great way for those of us who are here on this weekend to find ways to continue to connect. So I'll remind you about that again, but just wanted to make you aware of those few things. So I'm going to make Shannon the host. And you're the host now, Shannon. So you should be able to share your screen when you need to.
Okay, we'll give that a try here. We're learning how to do this. Did that work?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Spencer. It was just so good to see so many familiar faces as you guys were just checking in. And I love the North Star community. And I think my first conference was maybe 2014. So it's been several years now that I've been just invested into the North Star community, and it's always just been a wonderful experience. So thank you again for having me. I've been married 19 and a half years as well. I think there was another couple who said 19 and a half. So we are coming up on 20 years as well. And kind of an interesting fact is that when Spencer first contacted me about the summit, my family was evacuated because we live in Portland, Oregon, and we had wildfires that were threatening our town. So thankfully, our home is safe and it didn't reach our town. So we were very grateful for that. So, but that was kind of crazy. It took a little bit for Spencer and I to connect because I'm like, we're displaced. Yeah, so in our marriage, I am the one who grew up with significant gender dysphoria. And it wasn't until probably my mid-20s to where I was able to fully integrate into my assigned birth sex as a woman. And I'm also the spouse in our marriage who struggles with same-sex attraction. So having that dynamic in our marriage has certainly been challenging and very painful at times. We have learned a lot, and we've seen a lot of growth in our intimacy. And I think just like, Spencer was saying this, but I think even because of the struggles that we shared together, that has grown us deeper into this marital bond that we do share in today. The talk we want to talk about tonight is how to protect your marriage and how to deepen intimacy. So most couples that real quick, if you happen to have this outline, you may have gotten an email. And if you're a note taker, I just wanted to provide something that you could take notes if you wanted to. Check your email if you wanted that to be an option. Otherwise, I do have some slides that we'll kind of talk through tonight. But a lot of couples that I see in my practice when they come to me wanting to process the difficulties that they're experiencing, at least one spouse, sometimes both, have gender attractions or are trans identified. So they're coming from that perspective within their marriage. And the circumstances are always widely vastly different on how they are processing that, on how they're dealing with that piece in their marriage. But what seems to be a common theme that I continue to see over and over after seeing many couples over the years is that at least one spouse or both spouses are in a deep place of suffering, and specifically from loneliness. Even though they're in this marriage together, there's a deep-seated loneliness there. Let me click on here and show you. Oh, that's my crew, by the way. Sorry. I meant to show that earlier. So I have the 3 boys there, 9, 6, 3. Anyway, rough transition back to loneliness. So you have this marriage, and the marriage exists, but they're hurting so deeply, both spouses are hurting so deeply that they've forgotten or they've never learned how to water and nourish and comfort one another in their own marriage. They may seek other places for that comfort. That could be even through friendships, or that could be with their Heavenly Father. That could be through addictions. They could be reaching out in a variety of places, but they have yet to learn, or they're struggling to continue to learn how to comfort one another. And so little fruit comes from that within our marriages. We can function, we can make daily decisions together, we can have a well-oiled machine running in the home front, we can be good with finances, we can achieve a lot of things, but on the emotional level, the fruit in which we are living in, the marriage, the living organism of our marriage, can have a hard time showing fruit or growing if we haven't learned how to nourish it and comfort that marriage. So this visual that I'm sharing tonight, that may describe where you're at right now, like even tonight in this very moment, the reality of how pain feels in your marriage. Or it may represent something like a place you've been before and you pray that you never return back to that place. Or it could be a place that you don't feel this level of dehydration in your marriage, but you also don't want to, and you want to do whatever you can to avoid this level of pain or of disconnection and loneliness. So no matter where you find yourself tonight, the most important part, I feel, about us gathering tonight in this way to talk about this specific subject is for you to hear from me, and for you to see all these other couples from around the country are showing up tonight, for you to hear and see that you are not alone, that the marriage that you're in can be hurting. And tonight, for this moment, you are not alone in feeling some of that pain. We feel that pain in all of our marriages, and it's how we navigate that together and learn how to do that together. So 2020, it's been a hard year. It's been a very hard year. And if it's brought out anything in us, I feel like it's brought out this fear or this FOMO in us. Like, I'm cool, I'm just gonna stay here and nurse my FOMO. There's this like FOMO, let me just explain that for a minute. So what is FOMO? FOMO is this silly little term, cultural term, that means the fear of missing out. So FOMO, the fear of missing out. And so in 2020, gosh, how many things have been shifted, altered, canceled in our lives? You know, trips we've wanted to take, vacations we've wanted to take, retreats, marriage summits, You know, there are a variety of number of things, sports games, school events, or even just school. You know, there's so many things, maybe even holidays. Like we're coming up on the holiday season and our nation is in a surge again of COVID numbers. And so here we are again, adjusting, and this fear can rise up in us, like, what are we missing out on? Yeah, that fear of missing out. So what happens though when that FOMO, so that's just a silly little term, but it's real. It's real. This sense of like, what are we missing out on? How the anxiety of just staying home, or the anxiety of staying trapped, or the anxiety of not having choices, like that's a real psychological thing that can happen with us. But what happens when our FOMO can show up in more tender variations, such as this? What happens when that maybe stirs up some FOMO? This fear of, am I missing out? Because what I'm in is hard. Now I know that this picture specifically, for some of us, can stir up some real discomfort. And I want us to pause here for a minute, not because I want you to meditate on this. I want to pause here because I want you to notice what goes on within you when you see this. Does it stir up in you anger? Does it stir up in you fear? Does it stir up longing? Does it stir up tension? Or maybe it stirs up something else. But what is it? What could this stir up in you? So one of the first steps in actually protecting your marriage is to acknowledge that maybe there's some FOMO happening. Maybe there is some fears. Now, again, what does the F stand for in FOMO? Is fear. Fear. Fear of missing out. FOMO is driven. Fear is driven and can influence us to doubt our current circumstances, that our current circumstances is lacking value and worth, and that something else is better on the other side. On the other side of the fence, something else is better. And these doubts, the fear kind of drives those doubts, and the doubts work against protecting your marriage, right? So we have to understand, we have to acknowledge when that is happening to us. When am I feeling that fear? And what are my honest beliefs about those fears? What are your honest beliefs about the difficulties that your marriage can come up against? What are your beliefs about them? So beliefs kind of sound like this. These might not be yours. They may not resonate just like this, but these are some of the ones that I have had in my own marriage, in my own walk. A fear, a belief, it will always be uncomfortable. A fear that I will always feel alone. A fear that I'll never be understood, that I'm not enough, that I'm unwanted, that this marriage that I'm in currently will never satisfy. So what are some of the honest fears? This is letter B of your outline. What are some of the honest fears and doubts about the difficulties of your marriage? This is really important to figure out what some of those beliefs are. And here are some clues. It feels really negative. it often will sound like all or nothing, black and white, and it'll feel like absolute truth. It'll feel real strong. But letter C, and here's something really critical. Fear can lead us to believe that any disconnection, any loneliness or resentment we might feel in our marriage is caused solely by you or your spouse's sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, let me say that again, because I use my words very carefully. That fear can lead us to believe that any disconnection, any loneliness, any resentment that comes up in our marriage towards my spouse is caused solely by you or your spouse's sexual orientation or gender identity. That's what fear can bring up and have us believe, okay? So to flush it out a little more, I wanna use the analogy of a car tonight, and marriage being the car. And what can happen if we allow fear to get behind the driver's seat, the wheel? Okay, if fear begins to drive.
Hey, Shannon, real quick.
Yeah.
A couple just emailed me. I can't see who needs to come in from the waiting room, and they've been waiting a few minutes. And sorry, it won't let me make you the co-host for whatever reason. But if you go to the waiting room, there's a couple there, the Holtz. If you hit admit.
Okay. Assuming I know how to do that. Okay, hold on.
Or you can make me the host real quick and I can do it, and then I'll put you back as host. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt yours.
It's okay. I have to stop my share, I think.
Yeah.
So stop my, okay. Okay. So where do I go to find them?
So it should be your waiting room.
Admit.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I think I did it.
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
I think we're
good.
good. Uh-huh.
Okay. Thanks. Let me know if that happens again. Now I can do it a little quicker, hopefully. Okay. So what happens when fear gets behind the wheel? So fear is going to give you these really, really intense negative beliefs that are usually all or nothing thinking. So fear, and when fear is driving the car, the marriage car, and it gets really loud, those beliefs, those thoughts get really loud, it's hard to sleep at night. Guess who's riding in the shotgun? Is anxiety. So anxiety and fear are like best friends. They feed off each other big time. And so in tandem, these two work overtime to convince us with absolute certainty that our fears are true, whatever those fears that you're feeling or believing. But it's not just anxiety, right? So depression certainly comes into the car, and depression's along for the ride, but we often don't like depression to speak. So depression can get kind of tossed into the back seat and, throw on the headphones, look out the window, or just stare at your phone. That's where depression lives, and just check out, disconnect, right? So that's where depression likes to live. But let's not forget one of the key passengers when fear is driving the car for you or your spouse. One of the key passengers in the car is shame. And shame has a pretty strategical placement. Shame likes to sit right behind the driver and likes to whisper to the driver all kinds of things about who they are. So you're living a lie. You're unworthy. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're an addict. All kinds of beliefs that are very negative, and it's about the core of who that person is. Okay. So when fear is driving the car, you can still have some hope for your marriage, even in this place that just, it feels like incredible amounts of suffering here. When fear is driving and anxieties in shotgun and depression and shame are just swirling all around, you can have some hope, but often that hope is kind of shoved in the middle back seat, which I don't know. I think that's the worst place in the car, right? Like, how many did you have to grow up and you got placed in the middle back seat? Like, that's the worst place to be in the car. And so it gets cramped there. There's not a lot of room for it to breathe and move and impact. So it's pretty small, but it can be there. So why is this important? This is important because if you don't acknowledge the fear is present and the role that it's playing in your mind, in your heart, and in your body, it's going to be really hard to get unstuck. It's going to be really hard to move and to deepen your marriage bond and your marriage relationship. So you have to know who you're letting drive the car for yourself in your marriage. So step one is to acknowledge that, okay, I have fear, that fear is happening for me. I fear of missing out. And these are what those beliefs look like. You spent some time kind of breaking that down. The second part would be become aware of who is driving your marriage car. Be aware of when fear takes over. Okay. And when you realize that fear is behind the wheel, here we are, we're on number 2, become aware of who is driving the car. And letter A is question if the fear is telling the truth. Is fear telling the truth? Now, let's go back to that belief that fear tells us, that any disconnection we feel in our marriage, any loneliness we feel, is all hinged on the one fact of my or my spouse's sexual orientation or gender identity. It's all hinged on that one thing. Fear is wanting you to believe that. So press into that a little bit. Is that true? Is it true? Well, it's important to validate, first of all, that it is true that sexual orientation and gender identity does influence your marriage, without a doubt. And it can make intimacy especially painful, especially difficult. That is real. It should not ever be dismissed. You can validate that pain. So, is it real? Well, maybe in part. Maybe in part, it influences my marriage and makes it challenging and difficult. But it is not true that our sexual orientation and our gender identity is the sole cause for disconnection and loneliness in your marriage right now, today. Now, how can that be? Now, how can that be? Because if that were true, let's just say, okay, let's just say it is true. It is true that that my sexual orientation and my gender identity struggles are the sole reason why I feel lonely in my marriage. Because if that were true, then every straight and cisgender marriage around us should be thriving without intimacy struggle, simply because their orientation aligns, simply because their genders complement, right? Well, that's not true, right? We know that's not true. Or we can flip it on its head and do the opposite. Because if that were true, if that would mean that every gay committed relationship would be thriving without struggles simply because their orientation is aligned and their genders are the same, right? But we know that's not true. we're not that simple. We're not that simple. Our sexuality and our genders are complex. And while they influence our marriages, they're not the sole reason for loneliness specifically. When Brian and I were married, 4 years into our marriage, we just moved across country from Indiana to Denver, Colorado. And we were leaving Indiana. We were leaving this amazing community, beautiful community. We were heavily invested, felt a lot of support there. I cried the whole way to Denver, Colorado. It was such a loss to get removed out of that community and get planted in a new city where I knew no one, like 2 people. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Sorry, I think my headphones are glitching. I'm gonna keep talking while I switch. So here we are in this new city. And my fears, can you still hear me? Can you still hear me okay? No, you can't. How about now? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm in this new city, and what begins to set in? Loneliness, big time. I begin to feel lonely and disconnected. And what do you think came back when I began to feel lonely and disconnected? I began to pull away from my spouse, and my fears around my sexual identity came back full force. Full force. What if I really can't do this in my marriage? What if intimacy with my husband is not possible? Everything okay, Spencer? Are we good? Can you hear me?
I think it was better with the other microphone, with the other earphones, but I think when you had the wireless ones, it was clearer.
Can you hear me like this?
A little bit.
Sorry. Is that working?
I think maybe try, yeah, talk a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I'm just gonna not do headphones.
Great.
Okay. All right, so where did I start off with? So I'm feeling lonely. Okay, so I'm feeling lonely in Denver, very disconnected. I don't have community. So I begin to pull away. I can feel this pull away from my spouse, and I'm feeling very lonely. And the fears begin to come up very loud within inside my mind, specifically around my sexual identity, which is saying, you can't do this. You cannot connect with your husband. You cannot be intimate with him. And if you're unable to be intimate with your husband, there's something wrong with your body. Something's not okay in your body. And I'm fooling myself. I'm fooling myself to think that I can be married to a man. And part of being a lesbian means I cannot be married to a man. And so all these beliefs coming very strong, very loud within inside my mind. And they were very fear-based. I felt a lot of anxiety around them. I felt a ton of depression in this time. It was very dark. You see, up until this point in my marriage, we've been married 4 years. And I'm just gonna, it's hard to share vulnerably. I'm just gonna be honest through a Zoom call, but we'd been married 4 years up until this point, and we had not yet been able to consummate the marriage because there were so many emotional blocks for us, so many intimacy blocks for us. And so you go that long, and those fears begin to come back up and to say, gosh, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can connect in this way. I don't know that I was made to. I don't know if it's possible. So, fear is a powerful thing. And I was hinging all of my marital fear, my anxiety, the pain, the loneliness that I was feeling. I was starving for emotional intimacy, starving for it. And I was hinging it, everything on why I wasn't getting it was because I'm gay. That was my train of thought. That's how I got there. I loved my husband. We're great friends. But at this point in our marriage, did not know how to connect in an intimate, emotional, physical, sexual way. It was very dark. Okay, so if I'm hinging everything on the fact that I'm gay, so that's the problem. I need to spend a little time in exploring what else could be possible. Because I know that not every gay committed relationship is thriving and amazing. So that can't be the only ticket answer out. So what else is happening here? What else is going on here? And one of the tactics that fear wants us to do is to believe that those fears are absolutely true, right? So we have to learn like how to poke holes into some of those fears, how to poke holes into them. What else is possible? Why else could I be struggling in my marriage? Well, maybe there's a higher purpose or a higher calling in my marriage that doesn't come by way of ease. Could that be happening? Maybe. What if me being human means I want to self-protect and I want to fight against oneness? Why? Because I don't like being vulnerable. Could that be happening? Yeah. That's like my MO right there. Like, I want to fight against vulnerability. What if my past trauma, my gender wounds from both genders can shut down the function, the sexual function, the emotional function of my body? What if that's possible? Yep. What if God did not intend to meet all of my emotional needs through this one person that I married? Could that be possible? Oh, yeah. What if being in a mixed orientation marriage is also challenging because our sex and gender differences expose greater levels of vulnerability? The differences we have can lead to greater vulnerability. Why? Because we may have miscommunication because our gender brains are wired different. We may have misalignment in sex drives because our sex hormones are wired differently. We may have disappointments in intimacy because the way we are made to give and receive sex with one another is very different. We are not one-dimensional. So while it is true that you may have same-sex attraction and that influences your intimacy, it does. It is not the sole reason why you may be feeling lonely or you may be struggling in your marriage. It's a both and. It could involve your sexual orientation, it could involve your gender identity, and it can involve being in a sexually different marriage. because men and women are different. And it's hard to learn how to grow in intimacy. So when we come up against that discomfort, I want us to pause. And instead of going to that quick fear belief of it's because I'm gay, it's because I'm gay, it's because I'm trans. Those are factors for sure. I would never downplay that, ever. It's not the only thing at play. It's not the only thing at play. And there are many days I wish it were. I wish it was that simple. And it's not. It's not. Okay? So what does my internal dialogue sound like when I allow myself to explore what else could be possible? Okay, I hear this fear. So yes, my gay attractions play a part, no doubt, but so does my humanity. So do my gender differences. So do my relational needs. And how God works out his divine plan through our marriage to refine me, to restore me, to move us towards oneness is also true. Is also true. And to allow room for you to be a complex, beautifully complex, wonderfully made, holistic person. Your mind is not separate from your body. Your body is not separate from your soul. He has designed you to work holistically. So we know fear can lie to us. We know that when fear drives the car, this can lead to difficulties. This can lead to loud false beliefs. But let me also share, okay, I'm going to flip it a little bit, and that's if we just dismiss the fears and try to get rid of the fears and try to crush the fears, we are going to miss a huge opportunity. This is the fork in the road for us. This is what I missed for years, is that I tried to avoid my fears. I tried to quiet my fears. I tried to just forget about them. And that didn't work. That didn't work. My fears around my attractions and my intimacy, just to try to ignore it, didn't work. So there's an opportunity here. And the opportunity is underneath the fear lies the treasure. Underneath the fear is what actually reveals what our heart is needing, what it's craving on an emotional level, and what needs to be healed. Okay, so it reveals our deepest legitimate emotional needs. Legitimate, God-given, God-blessed, God-designed emotional needs. Okay, so we move through and know that for many of you who have sat in some of my seminars know that I love education. So I'm aware that this may be a lot at one time. I'm aware that I kind of talk through a lot of different dynamics at once, but I'm going to give you some resources at the end, and Spencer's recording it so you can go back and take your time and pause it and think about it and wrestle with it. And I just know I have a short amount of time with you. And so I just want to get through that.
And Shannon, real quick, I think there's just a couple more people in the waiting room, just so you know. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Let me pause here. Okay, I think I did that.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but
it's okay. We're doing the best we can.
Yep.
Okay, so please do not just try to throw the fear out the window and try to avoid the fear. What I want us to do is to grow in how to move through the fear. Move through the fear by the first step of that is letting empathy get behind the wheel. Okay, so instead of fear, allow empathy to now get behind the wheel. And empathy is when you are the ability to be kind and listen towards your heart and validate the pain that you're feeling. Okay, so instead of reacting to fear, oh no, here I am, I'm thinking that I should leave my marriage because I'm gay, or I'm thinking that whatever those beliefs are, I'm always going to be alone in this marriage, or I'm always going to be rejected in this marriage. Those fears are there, and they're loud, and they're speaking loud, and they're causing a lot of suffering. To then pause, and instead of react to that fear, oh, I got to hide it away, or I need to shove it in the closet, I need to get rid of it, is to just say, okay, what are you revealing? Fears, what are you revealing to be true about my heart? What are you revealing to be true about the emotional needs that live underneath the fears? And so to do that, it's the first step in that is to validate your pain. And that's letter A under number 3. So number 3 moves through fear into empathy, and letter A is to validate that pain. What pain do you hear behind these fears? These were the fears we brought up in the beginning. It'll always be uncomfortable. I'll always feel alone. I'll never be understood. I'm unwanted. I'm not enough, right? Those are the fears. Is there pain in there that you can validate first? And that's the doorway, the empathy. Like, yes, it is uncomfortable. Yes, this is painful. Yes, I do feel alone. There is room to be kind to your heart and the pain that you are carrying, and being empathetic towards your pain. That's very important. Why? Because it calls off the dogs. It calls off the fight, flight, or freeze response to our pain, right? The part in us that keeps anxiety high, and we want to fight it, or we just want to freeze it out through depression, right? So the empathy allows us to soften and be kind to the pain that we are holding in our bodies and in our mind, in our experiences. Okay, so validate that pain. And then begin to ask yourself, what is the legitimate need underneath these fears? And if you just look at the ones we talked about tonight as examples, you can begin to see, oh, wait, I will always be uncomfortable. I'm longing for comfort. I will always feel alone. I'm longing for connection. I'll never be understood. I'm longing for acceptance. I'm unwanted. I'm longing to be desired. I'm longing to belong. I'm not enough. I'm longing for fulfillment or affirmation. It will never satisfy. I'm longing for impact. I'm longing for purpose in my marriage. Right? Now you have something to work with. These beautiful, powerful, God-breathed emotional needs are providing a pathway for you, are providing a pathway for me towards healing, towards emotional connection, emotional bonding. This is so, so critical, right? If we had just thrown fear out the window, we would lose all of this. We would lose the insight of this, right? So that's why there's like treasure here, but it's uncomfortable. So uncover those emotional, legitimate needs. So then what do you do with those emotional needs? Okay, so now I understand, like, here's what's really happening. Here's what's really driving the show. What do I do with that? And it's moving towards connection, moving towards the giving and receiving of those emotional needs. Brene Brown, she calls connection as the energy, I like to say love, the love that exists between two people when they feel seen and heard and valued. When they can give and receive without judgment. And all of a sudden there's a connection there. There's a bond there. There's an intimacy there. So one of the first ways to move towards connection is to move towards your Heavenly Father, to open up these emotional needs in the spiritual realm. Okay? This component, opening up your emotional needs to God, is actually one of the common themes that I see in mixed orientation couples who, quote unquote, make it, is the ability for each spouse to be able to open up their emotional needs also to God. To be able to ask him, God, how do you see my loneliness? God, do I belong with you? God, can you comfort me in my loneliness right now? And to invite him into the places that hurt and to speak out the need. God, do you accept me? God, how do you see me right now? And if it's not an affirming sound that you hear, it's most likely not your Heavenly Father's voice. Invite him into that place and allow yourself to receive his presence. And that requires intentional times of prayer, perhaps seeking his presence. And if trust is not present, so through that pathway of empathy, now driving the car, you begin to feel like, okay, I'm going to put hope in the front seat instead of in the middle, smashed in the back seat. And I'm going to work on building trust. And so if trust is not there with God, if trust is not there with your Heavenly Father, you believe that he has good for you, then that's where you start with him. You might not be able to invite him into those tender emotional needs yet. You might have to start with building trust with him first, that he has good for you, that he has not harmed you. You might have to start there. God, how can you help me build trust in you again? How do I do that with you? And those could be good questions to ask people you respect and care about, people you admire. Like, how do you build trust with God? How do you open that pathway so that you can experience those emotional needs on a spiritual level? And this is so critical for mixed orientation couples because we have learned that our spouse cannot or will not or is not designed to meet all of these needs for you all the time, 24/7, right? So the second step would be to invite your spouse into this place, would be to invite your spouse into the giving and receiving of emotional needs with one another. Now, when trust is present, again, if trust is not present with your spouse, you don't feel physically or emotionally safe with your spouse, you start there. You can't go any deeper into your intimacy unless trust is riding shotgun with empathy. Like, you have to have trust. You have to start building trust. You won't get very far. So if trust has been broken in your marriage, some specific things to ask is, how can I build your trust in me? What behaviors do I need to stop? Or what behaviors do I need to start doing? Or how can I help you feel safe with me? And this is an important one. What areas do I need to offer forgiveness towards you? Or what areas do I need to receive forgiveness? Because many marriages can stay stuck right here. and not know how to grow and build the trust of their relationships so that they can get to giving and receiving emotional needs with one another. Okay. So when trust is present, it's learning how to have the discussion around your emotional needs, right? I'm not talking about emotionally dumping. I'm not talking about emotionally venting. I'm not talking about emotionally blaming or pointing fingers at one another. I'm talking about having a discussion, a mutual conversation around emotional needs with your spouse. And that takes time. That means learning how to identify what you're actually feeling, how to recognize what are the emotional needs there, and then how to communicate that to your spouse. It means learning how to honor one another by listening well to one another. And so these are a lot of the relational tools that help us learn how to talk about emotional needs. And why that's so critical is that if we don't learn how to talk and have the conversation with each other about how to move towards emotional needs, it's going to be very difficult to deepen our intimacy with one another. So real quick, one of the best resources that gives practical tools on how to have this conversation and what could be happening is How We Love by Milan and Kay Yurkovich. Okay, just a real quick there. It kind of breaks down the process of learning how to do that with your spouse. Now, is it awkward to do this, to learn how to do this? Yes, it is so awkward. I'll be the first one to admit it. I've been horrible at it. It's been hard to learn how to communicate and to learn how to be vulnerable with my emotions, to be vulnerable with the emotional needs, to even admit that I have emotional needs, to even have that conversation, right? So it is awkward. It is vulnerable. But the vulnerability is key. And to be as specific as you can. So what it looks like is being able to, at some point with your spouse, to say what those critical needs are. So I'm needing to know right now if I really matter to you. Or I'm needing to know if you still enjoy being with me. Or I'm needing to know if you accept my experience on what I'm experiencing right now. Do you accept it? Not like it, love it, celebrate it. I'm asking, do you just accept that this is my experience that is happening to me right now and what I'm feeling, right? So to get to that level, being able to talk about those emotions, we have to be empathetic with one another. We have to trust one another, and we need some guidelines and skills and to grow in that. So that's the biggest thing, is to learn how to do that with your spouse. And there's no shortcuts. To learn how to grow in emotional language is hard. We don't come out of the womb just knowing how to do that. We have to learn and grow and make mistakes and forgive and try again and show up for one another, right? So there are many types of emotional needs, but if I could highlight just one emotional need that I would love that to be like, the takeaway of the night is one emotional need that I would love for us to learn how to do better with one another. It would be number 5, to give and receive comfort. To learn how to give and receive comfort from your spouse. Now, again, trust has to be present. But when one spouse is able to share their vulnerable tears or their vulnerable pain while the other spouse holds them, with empathy and compassion. So then all of a sudden the marriage cart looks like this. When there is comfort and compassion in the marriage car, all of a sudden there's an opportunity and deeper intimacy is being felt. There's a deeper bond happening. It is hard to feel lonely and rejected when we are experiencing comfort and compassion. But that requires both partners to be present and giving and receiving. And this is happening mutually, not just one spouse continually being comforted and one spouse receiving compassion, but the other spouse is receiving comfort and the other spouse is receiving compassion too. And this begins to deepen that emotional bond. This is huge, the giving and receiving of comfort. And I want to kind of end on this last part, which talks about intimacy, because this is critical. The giving and receiving of comfort is specifically the emotional and physical care for one another's pain, which is different than sexual intimacy. Sexual intimacy is a moving towards one another and engaging one another for the purpose of sexual pleasure. All right, so giving and receiving comfort has to do about caring for one another emotionally and physically by way of one's pain, right? That's different from sexual intimacy. Sexual intimacy is coming together to give and receive through pleasure, all right? So here's one thing I want to say that's specific to mixed orientation couples, is that if you're in the process of offering comfort around one of the spouse's pain, can I encourage you to pause and not allow it to go into the sexual realm? Okay, because here's why. Again, the purpose of the sexual realm is to increase that emotional bond through pleasure, through enjoyment of one another, which are beautiful emotional needs as well. But to offer healing and comfort within the marriage by way through the pain, if you stay there and hold that, then deeper healing happens around the pain. Okay, then we're not training our minds to look for pleasure to cover pain. Okay, that's a strong addictive pattern, is to cover pain with pleasure. We don't want to recreate that. We want to deepen intimacy within our marriage by way of comfort through the pain and allow that to be a very deep healing experience for both spouses. Okay, so I just want us to pause and not turn that into the sexual place. Now, sorry, excuse me. Does that make sense? Yeah, so foster those times of comfort. They're really important because when pain is driving the show, right? We know what that looks like. When pain's riding the marriage car, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's depression, and there's shame. And when the marriage car is driving with those running the show, guess what happens to the masculine sexual soul? It shuts down. The masculine soul is all about needing to show up and to impact with purpose and strength and honor. But when the pain is overshadowing and fear and anxiety and depression and shame are running that show, the masculine soul shuts down. And guess what happens to the feminine soul? The feminine soul shuts down. Her ability to open up and to receive gets shut down. Her ability to nurture and open herself up and to nurture and show up with her level of intimacy to give life shuts down when fear is driving the car. So if we can be patient and foster and deepen empathy and trust, if we can provide more opportunities for comfort, more opportunities for compassion, look what begins to happen to the masculine and feminine soul. They begin to open up towards one another, and they begin to receive each other. They begin to receive each other. Now, not all the time. This is not a guarantee, or, all you have to do is take the blue pill, the blue car pill, and then all of a sudden you'll have this amazing sexual intimacy with your spouse. No. But sometimes when the masculine and the feminine soul can open up to one another, and trust is driving, empathy is driving, and comfort's in the car, and compassion's in the car, there's opportunity sometimes for them to receive each other in the sexual intimacy. Okay. It took 8 years for my husband and I to experience this. That's a long time. And out of that fruit, we've been able to have 3 children, which I never thought was possible. And since having children, that's the second layer of vulnerability of like, okay, so once we're out of the baby making phase, so to speak, is intimacy still possible here? And for me to be able to say, yes, intimacy is still possible here, only because we continue to fight to trust each other, to build comfort with one another, to hold compassion with each other, that we are able to come together in that sexual union that I never thought we would ever get here. Okay, so I want to encourage you tonight that there are possibilities, there are other things happening within your marriage, to take time to figure out the different pieces, to hang in there, to move towards connection, to move towards each other, and to allow God to begin to bring deeper layers of healing for you as a person, but also in your marriage. There is I just want to stop there, but 3 resources. One is on my comearise.org ministry website. There's an e-course that you can go through if you want to learn more in depth about the cycle of connection and how to walk through connection with yourself, with God, and with others, your spouse. That breaks it down a lot more. I already said the How We Love book, which is like on communication, and specifically how to receive comfort with your spouse. It's hard, it's awkward, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And the third one is hot off the press. This just got released last week. I'm already through with it. It took me 2 days to read. It's called An Impossible Marriage: What Our Mixed Orientation Marriage Has Taught Us About Love and the Gospel. It totally gutted me. I cried throughout the whole thing. I'm like, oh my gosh. It's really good. Anyway, that's what I had to share tonight. I don't know if there's time. Spencer, you can decide if there's time for questions. I'm here. I don't have to go anywhere for a little bit. So
Yeah, I think it'd be great to turn over to questions. I think there was such valuable, rich content, Shannon. It was amazing. Maybe if you can make me back the host, if that's okay.
Oh yeah.
So click on me and click those 3 buttons.
Okay.
And click make host.
Okay. Oh, if you look at my side real quick, last mention is that, do you notice I added depression and fear and anxiety are human experiences. They're still welcomed in the car. We just don't want to give them the keys. Okay. So they're still welcome in the car, but okay. I'm trying stop share. And I'm going to click on you. Make host. All right, it's all you.
Sorry, I was muted. If you have questions or if you have things you want to ask, I think let's take advantage of this time.
You can type it in the chat.
Or you could type it in the chat and I could read it if you don't want it to be heard by others.
Yes. Yeah, when I think of trust, I instantly think of safety. So I think about, how do I feel emotionally safe with my spouse? Am I able to share my disappointments? Am I able to share what I'm sad about, what I'm hopeful about? So beginning to start some of those emotional conversations. Do I feel safe with them? And if I don't, why is that? Maybe because he keeps cutting me off, or he has a hard time listening. Okay, can we work on that? Let's work on, how do we listen to one another without the need to fix it, but truly learn how to listen with one another. And so I think of those things come to mind. Building safety and listening, and being able to identify what makes me feel unsafe.
Someone wrote, who is the author of the Impossible Marriage book mentioned as a resource?
Yeah, it's by Lori and Matt Krieg, Krieg. Lori and Matt Krieg. And it's very honest. So just a word of caution, it might bring up a lot of things for you. And so it might be good to process it with someone. Very raw, honest journey.
There, we have several couples on here where one identifies as transgender or has gender dysphoria. And you mentioned about like the sexual intimacy, about both genders complementing each other. What about when one spouse presents as female and the other spouse is female?
Yeah.
Like guidance or help with
that. Yes. Under the umbrella of fostering emotional intimacy, to me, it depends on how much gender dysphoria is present. Because if the trans spouse is also experiencing clinical levels of gender dysphoria, which is not always the case, but if the trans spouse is experiencing clinical levels, meaning high levels of distress, high levels of anxiety affecting their daily life around their gender, that's what's first on the table. That's what needs to be worked with first. There won't be a lot of emotional intimacy to be able to navigate that very well when there's high levels of anxiety on the table. So that's what I would say. Like, if there's gender dysphoria, like clinical levels of gender dysphoria happening, that's kind of where the couple needs their time and their resources and their support needs to be on reducing that gender dysphoria. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, that's really helpful. So we have a baby that loves to squawk now. He found his voice. And so if you hear squawking in the back.
That's all good. Yeah, but it's tender. Like that's very tender. So it's really about being patient, honoring where both spouses are, because it has to feel and be safe for both spouses. Yeah.
And I think a common thing, I think so many of us, at least I experienced when we were first married, was it was all my fault because I was the one that experienced same-sex attraction. It was all my fault. And my wife, she had to figure out as well, it was her own journey of she put the blame on me. So if we both had to walk that road, but how would you say if people are in that space, like where do they move forward from there? Because I feel like it's an easy trap to get stuck in, or sometimes to fall back into, because I sometimes can fall back into that. But what would you recommend for people who are in that phase currently?
Can I flesh it out a little bit, Spencer?
Yes, please.
Okay, so if one spouse is believing my spouse would be happier without me because I just mess it all up, it's because of me that we are experiencing difficulties, right? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So what do you hear in that? What do you think? Is it true, right? Is it true that the orientation piece affects the marriage, right? So there needs to be a level of compassion towards yourself. Well, yeah, that is true that it affects my marriage. Now, what does it offer me to put all the blame on me? What does it offer my marriage if I put all the difficulties, all the blame on me? And I'm purposely pausing there, so there's an important question there to explore. How does that serve me? Does that keep my fears alive and shame breathing down my neck? It's all your fault. Does that keep shame alive in my marriage? Yeah. So that's a powerful thing to experience. And so to me, the emotional need under shame, right? The emotional need under shame is I need to feel worthy. I need to feel valuable. Instead, I feel opposite, right? I feel horrible. And so it's really work around shame. That's the therapeutic work at hand is shame. And it's wanting to keep you stuck in it. There's a new book called The Soul of Shame by Kurt Thompson, I want to say. Kurt Thompson, The Soul of Shame. Yeah. So it's shame work. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I feel like shame work has so many layers to it. Like I've had to do so much shame work in my life and I think, oh crap, I'm at it again, more shame work. But like I think there's so many layers to shame. So
yeah. And if I may, just in and of that, even that reaction to it, here I am again, and it's like, yeah, here I am again because I'm human. Because I'm human. And this has been hard. And it's hard to break the ties, the stickiness of shame. It just is. It wants to lead, right?
yeah, no, that's so true. So I had somebody, oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
Just compassion towards yourself, empathy towards yourself. Yeah.
So somebody sent me a question. It was, what about when you don't feel safe sharing with your spouse?
Emotionally?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, to do some work as to ask why. Because when I share with them, I feel what? I feel attacked emotionally. I feel manipulated. I feel why? Spend some time. That's good that you've uncovered. I don't feel safe emotionally. That's huge to identify that because that will keep you from deepening intimacy for sure. This book, the How We Love book, goes into this much more in depth of how we respond to pain and why we react differently to pain and how that could be affecting communication to the point why you don't feel safe with your spouse. Is it something they're saying to you? Is it something they're doing when you're trying to talk with them? Yeah, spend some more time flushing that out and then decide if you want to have that conversation. If it doesn't feel like you can have that conversation because of the pattern that keeps happening up, that's when extra support like a mediator or a therapist can help mediate that discussion to help you. If it's to that point where it feels like we can't even have a conversation around it and I don't feel safe sharing, that's very helpful to get some support around that. So that was the initial slides I shared about those beliefs that are underlining the fear. So I feel alone, I feel rejected. Those types of beliefs, both spouse could be feeling those things, right? And so when I share, is that true that you're experiencing that only because of you or your spouse's orientation or gender identity? I'm talking to both spouses, right? So because it's not true, like what you just shared, right? Like it's not all hinged on one deal or one element or one factor of our sexuality. Yeah. So looking at what are the other factors. So when I shared about my humanity, my emotional needs, God's purposes for marriage, like those are for both spouses that are at play. You know, you're married to a human, so she obviously plays a factor into how well or how deep you can go into that emotional intimacy. Yeah. And how they react to their pain that's in the marriage. Are they avoiding the pain? That's their piece of it. Are they the victim in the pain? That's their piece of it. This breaks down a lot of how people are responding to pain and how to then move towards comforting each other. Yeah, that's very true. It's very true. Yeah, I think it's very true. And I think for a lot of years, I think we got it wrong. I think we thought healthiness meant that it had to be totally out of the picture. And that's just not true. It's not true. We can accept the human parts of us and the places of grief and the places of loss, and they can be a part of our stories, and they don't always have to take up the whole page like you described. Yeah.
Let's open up for one more question, and then I'll do a few housekeeping things. And I forgot to open us with a prayer, so I apologize, but I'll ask Jeff Case to close us with a prayer, so I apologize. Or Shannon, if they have questions they want to ask you privately, is there a way for them to contact you, like on your website, or how would you?
Yeah, you can send me an email, and it's just my name, Shannon Rants, and then LPC at Gmail. And I am homeschooling full-time 3 little boys, so I may not respond within the day or even the next day, but know that I am reading and will get to you when I can. Yeah.
Perfect. I just put your email in the chat, so if you want to reference it there. And then all right. Well, Shannon, thank you so much. You always have so much to offer and great ways to describe things. And I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your story and your pains. And I think all of us relate to that, and it helps us, I think all feel more connected when the presenter is also willing to be vulnerable. So know that we feel that and hear that with you. And anyway, I'm feeling tonight more hopeful and encouraged, and I think, I hope all of you are feeling that as well. We've put a lot of prayer into this and been praying and fasting that it would go well. So I'm so thankful for you and everything. Thank
you. It's good to be with you guys. I wish I could be with you in person, just to feel the presence of the room, but I'm grateful to even have this. So
yeah, amen. I totally agree.
Yeah.